roll curb so that emergency vehicles can go up on them. The only problem is their location. You can go up it. There's no place to ever come back down again. And Caltrans said, oh, of course there is. And the PIO said, no, there's not. So go check on it. So that was one of them. And then we talked about just the timing of the lights and what a mess it makes at intersections. And they said, well, that will probably continue until the project is complete, when they have better signage and they can sync all of the lights. But Thursday, I think it was this last Thursday, I was at the new grocery outlet on Sanderson, came out on Florida, of course, made the right-hand turn to go into the turn lane, and I was in the furthest, that direction, east driveway that I could possibly get into, and the cars were backed up in the turn lane all the way down to In-N-Out Burger. So
that was also the same thing on Wednesday.
Yes,
the day before.
and then on Thursday and on Friday and on Saturday, and I believe Chris is going to take to him. You could get three people through the light on that turn.
We told them that before they even put that project in.
Yeah.
And we had conversations with them about the timing, light timing.
And for the record, they told us that they were going to put a traffic camera to watch that intersection specifically, and never did.
Well, and the interesting thing on that is that all the other direction left turns go for at least 20 seconds to allow probably 10 to 15 cars to go through. Right. But southbound, if you're going south on Sanderson, 3 cars. Well, I sat there through 7 turns and finally pulled out and went around the block the other
direction. On Friday night, it was one car. And then when I went a few nights later, it was 1 green, 1 yellow, and 1 red. 3 cars.
It's crazy. Yeah, so safety project.
Yeah, we'll follow up again. I know that they were out there. I think I got an email Monday, I think, and we followed up, and they had made some adjustments, I think that Tuesday, but it sounds like we need to follow back up with them and say the adjustments aren't working, but we'll follow up with them on that as well.
So that was our meeting.
Okay. And CDBG ad hoc committee has concluded their work.
Yes, we can disband that.
So, do we need a motion at this point to do that, or should we do that at the end?
At the end of the meeting?
No.
Or right? I'm fine with you doing it right now. Although I wasn't around, I don't know how you established it, or if you have other procedures you typically follow.
Well, we had it established at the outset when we
Move to disband.
Okay. Okay. Roll call vote, please.
Mayor Brown?
Yes.
Mayor Potem Krupa?
Yes.
Councilmember Meyer?
Yes.
Councilmember Percival?
Yes.
Councilmember Wright?
Yes.
That motion passes unanimously. Thank you to ad hoc committee members for their fine work. And council protocol ad hoc committee, we have yet to meet on that. City manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a few updates. The city's moving forward with the strategic planning, and so we will be nailing down a date hopefully in the next week for the public workshops, as well as other dates related to. Correct. And so we'll be following up with the council to see when they're available, what their availability is, and then solidify that date. Tomorrow, swearing-in ceremony for Chief Poos, so we're all excited for that. We'll be here. Want to give thanks to the residents that were impacted by the Kirby water main break. I know our crews were out there figuring out the solutions to that issue. So just want to give thanks for their patience in dealing with that issue. So many thanks.
I'd like to give kudos to our staff and the collaboration with Lake Hemet Water District to get that completed with minimal disruption to the community. So thank you to our staff for that.
Very much kudos to our Public Works team, water team, Tim and the rest of the crews out there that were involved in helping with that, as well as Lake Hemet. Mike Gow was just a real asset for the valley, so I want to give thanks to them. We have seen an increase in streetlight thefts, And so the council did make a mid-year budget appropriation for one of the LMDs to allocate some funding to address one of the areas that had been hit by streetlights. And so we've gotten a couple calls from residents about an area in particular. And so we've responded to those individuals. We had to go out to bid for that project just because we don't have the staff capacity to do that. So we have a pre-construction meeting for one item in particular that the council has followed up with me on. Pre-construction meeting tomorrow. We hope to have that project done by the end of the month. So we'll get some more information once to the council once that's been solidified so that everyone knows what's going on. Again, I want to thank the Public Works team. We had lots of rain in a short amount of time, and so obviously that creates issues for us. So I want to thank the Public Works team for being proactive and really responsive to the issues that come up. And I know I got a phone message this morning at 6:30, and the teams were out there taking care of it. So thank you for that. Yeah, sure. And then finally, we'll be moving forward with the special events information moving forward for the upcoming fiscal year. So that's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. Item 12, future agenda items. Do any council members have any requests for future agenda items? We have a pretty full plate. And, okay. So we'll go with what we have for now. And that brings us to adjournment. Thank you all for your indulgence, and thank you, council. Thank you, staff. We're adjourned until March 24th. Okay, so now we need to convene the Hemet Housing Authority.
Okay, I would like to convene the Hemet Housing Authority meeting for today, March 10th. Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Chairperson Percival.
Here.
Vice Chairperson Wright. Here. Board members Brown.
Here.
Krupa. Here. Meyer.
Here.
Thank you.
All right. Can I get first motion to approve the minutes? Oh, yeah, okay. Communications from the public. Is there anybody that would like to speak on any of the non-agenda items?
No, I have not received any requests to speak.
Okay. With that, we will move on to the approval of the minutes.
Second.
Please vote.
Aye.
Roll call.
Oh.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that passes unanimously. Okay, up next, item number 4, discussion item, which is a resolution approving the First Amendment to the agreement containing covenants affecting real property at 203 Prado Drive, Hemet.
So Tiffany from the Finance Department will be giving this presentation.
Around 2010, the City of Hemet Housing Authority operated a down payment assistance program in which the primary goal was to provide housing inventory on the road.
Can you get your microphone closer to your mouth? And
You can try.
We not have conversation while we're in session.
Yeah, thanks.
The primary goal was to provide housing inventory on a continuing basis that would be available for purchase of households of purchase of. Hello. Okay. For purchase of households of low to moderate income. The program provided down payment assistance as a silent second in the amount of up to $30,000. All buyers participating in this program agreed to the terms and conditions of an affordability period of 45 years. Within these terms, the purchaser signed loan documents, including a promissory note, a disclosure notice, a deed of trust, and covenant agreement that upon sale, transfer, or any other disposition of the loan, the loan would be repaid. The home would remain affordable and sold to households with an annual income not to exceed 120% of the area median income as determined by the California Department of Housing and Community Development. The property in which we are discussing tonight is 203 Prado Drive, located in the city of Hemet. The property was acquired by Mr. James Maltby in November 2010 with $30,000 from the Hemet Housing Authority Down Payment Assistance Program using RDA funds. In accordance to the program parameters, Mr. Maltby signed and entered into an agreement set forth in the covenant affecting real property. In September 2019, the escrow company contacted the city for a demand on the property. It was disclosed that the property could be sold, but the affordability restrictions in covenant could not be lifted. The restriction prompted Mr. Maltby to reach out to the city to further discuss. After consulting with our city attorney and city manager, it was explained to Mr. Maltby that if he wanted to sell the property, the options would be to pay off the down payment assistant loan, to discharge the promissory note, and allow the city to reconvey the deed of trust. However, the property would need to be sold at an affordable rate, and the new buyer would need to agree and meet to the affordability restrictions within the covenant. Or he could request an amendment to the agreement that would still require payoff of the down payment assistant loans, but include a recapture of equity sharing at the rate of the original investment from the Hemet Housing Authority. This would permit the city to discharge the promissory note, reconvey the deed of trust, and cancel and terminate the covenant. For clarification, in this recommended agreement, Mr. Maltby will pay a total of approximately $61,000, which includes the initial $30,000 plus equity shared of $31,000 in the property if the property is sold for $311,000. This amount will vary slightly dependent on the final sale price, but the rate of 19.6 will remain constant for the equity share, since this is the rate of which the Hemet Housing Authority loaned Mr. Maltby at the time of the property's initial purchase of $153,000. Additionally noted that in discussions with the city attorney and HUD representative regarding the situation, recapture of equity sharing is a standard and acceptable process that occurs to avoid gifting of public funds. In January 2020, Mr. Maltby contacted the city to inform us that the property was reactivated and would probably sell shortly, requesting the city to proceed with the amendment to the agreement, which has led us to this evening's discussion. It is recommended to adopt a resolution and approve the First Amendment of the agreement containing covenants affecting real property at 203 Prado Drive, and ask for direction on how to proceed in the event that this situation arises with other down payment assistance loans of this nature.
All right, thank you for that report. I have a couple questions regarding the report and the agreement that's made as I'm reading through this. One of the things that first catches my eye is that we have in there under would be item number 1 in the agreement is that it would pay back the principal and interest amount for $32,000. The principal amount, from my understanding and reading the note that's been recorded on the property, is at a principal balance of $30,000, and that was the original loan amount.
Correct.
There is no indication anywhere in the note that says anything about any interest. So my assumption is that the interest rate is 0%.
Correct.
So if the interest rate is 0%, then the amount due would be straight the principal balance of $30,000.
Yes.
So where did we come up with that extra $2,000?
That was actually given to me by the attorneys that had reviewed the documentation, so I would have to look into it further.
Okay. So that's one. The other item is the if the funds that were made available under this down payment assistance program, correct me if I'm wrong, but they came out of the Dodd-Frank Financial Reform Act of 2009, 2010, 11, 12, 2012.
I do not know.
So that's based on what I read from HUD's website under this neighborhood stabilization.
It is actually not NSP related.
So then these funds didn't come from Dodd-Frank.
It came from RDA, redevelopment funds.
Okay. So
It was initially thought that it was part of the NSP program, and that was because of documentation that was on the forms, but trailing it back, it was all RDA related funding.
okay, so since RDA has been wiped out, is there going to be a requirement from the state that any money received back from this the allocation from RDA funds will have to be sent back to the state of California?
No, not sent back. It will be, we will have to monitor it and report it on an ongoing basis. And if we go to reuse it, we will have to report that as well.
Okay, so any money that we bring back into this program, we can then reallocate it under down
Correct.
payment assistance. Okay, and then the other question that I have is, I know from my experience working with other cities that used this similar down payment, they had a breakdown. And reading the notes that were supplied in the staff report from HUD, there's a breakdown that if the property remained the primary residence of the borrower for X number of years, whether it be 5 years, like every 5-year increment, that the principal balance would be reduced by a certain amount. I noticed that in ours, we don't have that. Other cities do have that. So that, from what I recall, is that they've been in this house for over 10 years. If we had that same, if our program was just like other cities, there would be a principal reduction or a principal forgiveness based on, because the intent of this program was to get vacant homes filled, basically bank-owned homes that have been sitting for months and months and months, to help stabilize the neighborhoods and get them. So from my perspective, and I've had this conversation with the city manager, is that the intent of this program has been met because it stabilized the neighborhood, it helped bring property values back up. So that's kind of where my stance is that I think there needs to be, and I don't speak just for this particular property, I'm speaking on behalf of all the properties that have used this program, so that whatever decision is made tonight on this particular property, that be the decision that's made on all the properties that this financing mechanism was used. Because personally, I would have never used this program. I would have never recommended my client to use it based on the deed restrictions. And I go back to when I read through all of this before, when they had put this property on the market, they had gotten an appraisal report. From what I read in the appraisal report, that appraisal was based on an unencumbered property. And this deed restriction is an encumbrance that will affect the value and desirability of that property.
Correct.
So that appraisal report didn't take into consideration this encumbrance, which then would have devalued that property, which then in turn devalues the entire neighborhood. Because then when other neighbors that didn't use this program, that becomes a comparable for future sales on others. So that's another reason why I wouldn't have recommended this based on the way this is written in the deed restrictions on the covenants that I've read based on this property. But I'd like to pass it over.
I think one of the challenges with these types of agreements between government agencies and people that want to purchase homes is that there are requirements that are stipulated within those agreements that don't allow for the flexibility that you might want if you didn't utilize government funds to purchase that home. And so that's one of the trade-offs that is made when you enter into these types of agreements. I think the staff and I have talked about the not having to come back to council every single time, but really using the HUD guidelines that have been provided to us to allow us the flexibility to follow kind of those guidelines moving forward so that we're not having to deal with this every time this comes up. I think this is probably the first one that's come up with the use of these funds. And so we would want to get that direction to use the HUD guidelines that we provided in the background, the backup information, to utilize on a go-forward basis so that we're not having to bring forward these items each time. And so what we can do is bring forward a resolution that embodies those HUD guidelines so that we're not creating issues moving forward and we're not creating the scenario where we would run into the gift of public funds moving forward.
Okay. One of the other things, too, I want to point out, and you had, in your staff report, had made the comment about that the borrower was given all this up front and signed. It was all notarized. From my experience with loan signing notaries, they just say, sign here, sign here, sign here. Nothing is explained because the notary doesn't know what's in there, that it's always a default, refer back to your lender. So it would have been the responsibility of the lender to make sure that there was full understanding about these restrictions that were being placed on this property.
We did have this was back in housing days when we had a housing department.
Right.
And they did have a consultant that came in and did the work for the city, on the city's behalf. I don't know what it entailed, how much things were explained to the borrowers. But I understand where you're coming from.
Is there any way, so I'm looking at it would be listed as page 5 under the agenda item, or page 57, and it has the home rule, the home funds per unit, and it's got a minimum affordability period. If it's funds under 15,000, it's a 5-year period. If it's 15 to 40, it's a 10-year period. Is there a way that we can create this policy that it kind of tailors around this?
So that's what we would want to bring forward to the council in a resolution that embodies this and allows us to use that on a go-forward basis, using these parameters that have been put forward here.
Okay.
Affordability
I'm going
period
to go
for
on a
45
limb
years.
and assume that this is your property. This is a public hearing, yes?
It's not a hearing, but it's public comment, yeah.
Is there anything that you'd like to add?
Well, just like you're saying with the loan, like,
Yeah, you gotta.
this was James's first.
So actually,
If you could tell us who you are also.
I'm Karen Wolpe, I'm James's wife. How I came to find out about the program was, the city was looking for contractors come and help you guys rehab the homes and flip them. So my dad is actually the contractor, so I was working with the city for a couple of years doing this. That's actually why I went and got my real estate license. The city told us what to say, working with NPHS, what to say to the buyers. So I'm telling you now, none of the other people know. You know, this is on the back end of you were signing your loan docs. Nobody was told. We were told that you use the program, it goes down in money, and then if you go to sell, you can either you can transfer the funds, so like I would have been able to transfer the silent 30 or pay it back and move on. But there's nothing ever mentioned about these covenants. Otherwise, I would have never used the program. Nobody would have. I mean, it's not a good program. So we didn't know. So when we did sell the first time, when we got the news from Tiffany, like there's this 45-year thing, we were floored. And now it's been 6 months, and I just gotta get rid of the house.
Thank you. I do have a question real quick with this for the city attorney. And I know it's based on regional income levels and housing numbers, but just to kind of give some clarity as to the intent of the program was for affordable housing.
Correct.
Okay, so just to give just so that everybody understands some numbers, December of 1999, the statewide median home price in California was $225,000. Jump forward 10 years, the statewide, and this is in 2009 at the bottom of the housing market nationwide. California's median home price statewide $307,000. In 2019 today, well, in December of 2019, so just a few months ago, the statewide median doubled to $615,000. So Hemet is super affordable with the Hemet median at $290,000. It's like $286,000 for Hemet. That's a third of the statewide median. So, I mean, our housing prices in Hemet are still a third of what the statewide median is. So, is that something that we can use to say that this house still qualifies as affordable housing, even if it sells at 300? That's half the
So
statewide.
it's a two-part process, though. Not only does the home have to be sold at an affordable price, the people who buy it have to be income qualified as well.
So that is, I believe, the problem that you're
Well,
running
and that, I think that goes back to the encumbrance on this property that makes it, I mean, that's something that affects the value, is that if you've got somebody that's even at 120% of the median, they're not going to be able to afford anything in California. So, questions or comments from staff, or from council?
So what exactly are we going to do? Are we going to be able to change this, or are we going to, I mean, I just want to cut to the chase, because these people's lives we're holding in limbo, and it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, somebody that has to stay in a house for 45 years, they may as well die in it. And that's not fair.
I think one of the
We have the authority to change things, or we just have to do what we're told.
I think one of the challenges, and I've consulted with the attorney's office on this one, is the gift of public funds issue that comes up with respect to changing it based on how it's presented today. And so I think if the council chose to change it, you run into some serious issues related to a gift of public funds with respect to these particular funds. And so it creates some issues for the
So they give the
city.
30,000 back. We talked about interest rates tonight. They're certainly not 19%.
So the option
And
to
how can we
avoid
make
the
this
gift
simple?
is to have them repay the 30,000 and then also pay to the city a proportionate share of the equity in the home based off of the city's initial contribution towards the purchase price. So in this case, that's 19.6% of.
And I think that's ridiculous.
That's outrageous.
That's outrageous, absolutely. I mean, who gets to figure out that number? Who gets to pick that?
It's just, it's a math equation based off of the 30,000 that went in and the initial purchase price. You figure out what percentage the city's loan was of that amount. It's 19.6%, and that's how that number was.
And so we can't have any clause of they stayed there 10 years, like he was talking about, every so many years, then your percentage goes down?
So
They accomplished the goal we were.
I was not the attorney who did this work, unfortunately. However, that is, I know, an option under the federal programs. The issue here is this was not a federal program money. It was under the California Redevelopment Funds and the Health and Safety Code. So I'm just not comfortable opining off the cuff whether you can do that with RDA funds. But I do know it is an option with federal HUD funds.
I know there's a neighboring agency that had the similar issue. The difference with that agency was that their funding that they provided to individuals was in I think the $3,000 to $6,000 range, and so their requirement, even though they had the 45-year covenants on there, was less based on the affordability period. So they were able to forego the 45 years because those individuals had been there for the page that you referenced, page 5, for 5 years or longer, and so they were able to forego that. The challenge is that in the area from $15,000 to $40,000, it's a scale. So the period for there is 10 years, and correct me if I'm wrong, it hasn't been 10 years.
Well, 10 years will be December for us.
And so if the council wanted to delve down that path, the 10-year mark would be in December. So utilizing those guidelines, that's when you would be able to push that out. But then that means that they would have to wait until December to potentially sell their home.
And then if they sell it and we have to have people that are low income or affordable housing for them, who manages all that? The city?
So the city currently manages that program, and in particular with this program itself, I think there's about 5 or 6 properties.
There's about 14.
14 of these, but then there's an additional list of other properties that utilize NSP funding and a mix of other funding too in order to do similar type objectives at that time. So of these specific exact same type of concepts, 14?
You were correct first when you
Okay.
stated how many there were. I was including the NSP.
Okay, so 5 or 6 of this exact same concept, utilizing these funds, up to $30,000 for down payment assistance. There's an additional batch of homes that's a little bit more complicated and complex because of the funding sources that the city used to either rehab homes, provide down payment assistance, or do other things with the funding in order to get people into those homes.
So are we gonna gift those funds that it costs us to manage that, or we're gonna,
The city has to,
or do you see?
Use-
We're gonna end up spending more money dealing with this than just letting it go.
and the challenge is that the city is the one that's left to manage this program moving forward.
Can
And
we
it
just
creates
dissolve
some,
the program?
I don't know, it's,
So this is grant funding requirements. So once the city accepted the grant funds from the federal government, you have an obligation to make sure that you carry out the program during the life of those funds. And I don't know exactly the funding cycles involved, but it does go away, of the life.
Yeah, and since they quit and they bailed, then bummer.
the other challenge is that with respect to the NSP and those areas, as soon as we reached out to our HUD reps, they put up the walls and they said, hold on, what is it that you're trying to do? Because from their perspective, anything that the city tried to do with those other programs, those other funds for these other properties, they are, I think, going to have some serious challenges if the city chose to do something else. And I don't know that that would necessarily be the agency that you want overseeing or kind of meddling in your projects.
Oh, I mean, I just think of it like, they need to look at the big picture, and they could be dealing with a homeless family instead, so maybe they'd rather pay for that. You see what I'm saying? So we really need to push some buttons up there. This is ridiculous.
What options do we have at our disposal that are the best for the homeowner?
And not just this homeowner, but all the homeowners that are involved
I mean,
in this.
I can see asking for the 30,000 back,
That's reasonable.
but none of the rest of this. It's ludicrous, and I realize we're dealing with state agencies that are, and going on, but I mean, it really,
It's so ridiculous.
it is ridiculous. I'm going,
Well, and the biggest thing I
is
think
equity
is because
sharing? This is crazy.
this is RDA funds, and RDA is no longer.
Right, there's a reason they're not existing anymore.
So, yeah, governor wanted to balance his budget.
I think for the purposes of this particular property, you kind of need to ask the homeowner what's more important to them, action now or something that may result in a little less money out of your pocket, but it takes a little longer to achieve, because your options are essentially approve what's before you tonight or table it. We can go back and see if there's a possibility to incorporate some loan forgiveness, and I just don't know how urgent of an item this is for the particular.
So that's my next question is, you're in escrow now currently? What is your estimated close of escrow date?
I can push it a little bit, but, I probably think a month. I have it in a 4-week, just a normal 30-day right now. They do know what's going on, and they know I'm here tonight, to see if we can move forward, because the buyer's also CalHAPA, so CalHAPA can't have any of this on the covenants.
Of
So
course
that's
not.
why I was, coming to say, hey, I'll finally just pay,
Well, let me ask you this, as far as your escrow goes, has the appraisal for that buyer already been?
Not this buyer. I said, wait till after this council meeting so you don't waste, your $500 on the appraisal. It was appraised before I found out about this, we did get the appraisal at 311. I did drop the price to sell it, so we're at like 305 now.
But that appraiser didn't mention anything about this encumbrance
No,
on it.
absolutely not.
So that is an effect on that, so that appraisal is really no good.
Yeah, so I just wanted, my option, our goal was moving forward just to get anything we can do to get them removed, because I'm not gonna devalue my whole HOA over this house. And there's not very many for sale in my HOA. I think we have like 2 other listings right now. That's just gonna piss everybody off. So I was like, my only option is if I have to pay to get them off, I have to pay to get them off.
I think the thing that we need to remember too is that if this appraisal gets done, the appraiser has to account for this encumbrance
Yeah.
on this property, this deed restriction of 45 years. And that's gonna be significant. And as far as property tax revenue coming into the city, that's gonna be less because the value of the home is less.
I think one of the biggest things here is that, the council, and this is councils before you, really need to be aware of what they're signing on to when they delve down these programs, because now it's creating issues for councils down the road. And so the mindset of what was going on at that time, I don't know what that was, but I imagine that it was a lot of foreclosures, a lot of vacant homes. What can we do? What can we do to get people into these homes, and at what cost? At what expense? Or what are we willing to live with for future years that they wouldn't have to deal with at that moment? And so I think if I try and put myself into those shoes, I think there was a concern to get people into houses, not have a lot of vacant properties. And so I think what probably outweighed at that time was the conversation related to we'd much rather have people occupying these homes versus these vacant homes and the issues that go along with that. And so these 45-year covenants, these promises that are embedded in these agreements is kind of secondary or third down the road in terms of priority. I think the number one priority at that time was getting people into the homes.
And I don't disagree with that, but there was other programs available to people that were far better than this particular program.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we're having to take 20/20 hindsight and say woulda, coulda, shoulda. But the reality is that, to Carly's point, we're in a situation that is the epitome of unintended consequences and good intentions gone astray. And so we're basically handcuffed with very few limitations because we have to be mindful of not putting the city in jeopardy of breaking some law of gift of public funds, and we can be as empathetic as possible to their situation. And it's just a very untenable situation of which is the worst damaging of undesirable options, because these situations were created to try to help people get into homes, and we're in a situation where it's doing the exact opposite. So
is there an option that they pay the principal balance back and then all else is wiped clean and the public funds have been returned?
Based off of the analysis my office did, no, you would have to keep the affordability covenants in place in that scenario. The only option that gets you with the affordability covenants removed is to do this equity share. I don't know whether they looked at the specific question of the possibility of incorporating like a phased forgiveness of the loan over the life. So I can't give you an opinion on that, but it's something we could look into. I could go back and have our office look into it.
Would there be, okay, so this particular property, and I'm sure it's going to be about the same amount on all the other ones, around 19-20% was the down payment assistance to make sure that the first trust deed was 80% loan to value. Would there be a possibility to do a phased out equity share over time? So every year that the homeowner is in the property, that equity share gets reduced by 1 percentage point. So this particular, they've been there for 9 years. It would be, that equity share would go from 19%, 19.4 to 10.4.
We could look into that. I can't answer that right now off the top of my head, but we can certainly look into it.
basically do it retroactively.
Yeah, and make that for not just this property, but for all the properties that were involved in this particular program.
One of the things that we talked about was, ideally this would have been something that was embodied in the original agreement that said if you wanted to get out of this 45-year covenant, then that's spelled out in the contract. The challenge that we have with this in particular is that this contract speaks to nothing of that sort, and so we're having to now figure out the solution after the fact. But it wasn't uncommon for these types of equity sharing agreements to be built into these types of documents.
I can tell you that in the deed of trust, because I read the whole thing line by line, that there is a clause in there that states that failure of the city to enforce any of these covenants now does not prohibit the city from enforcing those covenants in the future. And it's like a specific paragraph. I want to go on a limb and say it's like paragraph 38, but I'm going off my memory, and it's somewhere around there.
I have a question for the homeowners. Since you closed escrow almost 10 years ago, did you do any improvements on your home?
Just like the basic, like flooring, paint, backyard.
Kitchen, bath remodels?
We didn't do a big, no, like, no massive.
Do you ever have to do a roof?
No, I didn't have to do the roof.
Fix any broken windows?
Recently, because the house was broken into.
And the house is in good condition now? So better than if you just let it sit for 10 years?
Oh, yeah, it's turned.
Okay.
We kept up on it, everything.
Excellent, thank you.
What kind of a time frame would you need for us to be able to make that decision if we're allowed to do it, where we do a reduction, percentage point reduction in the equity share for every year that the homeowner has lived in the house?
It's really a legal question, so I would defer to how long it would take them.
Sure.
Yeah, I would say relatively quickly, we could obviously, I know you're under time pressure, that we could do our best to get something on your next council agenda. I'm just not sure with deadlines, what your deadlines are here, and if that gives me days, or if that gives a week or two, what that looks like.
We meet in 2 weeks. So if you could live with that.
Yeah, so we can be as flexible as we can with the attorney's office and make sure that,
We can
if we can,
prioritize it.
if we can push out our deadlines, we'll do that.
And I just want to make sure that we're going to be in compliance with the program to not get the city in any hot water.
Correct, that's what we want to, I mean, the direction is very clear. You want to provide as much as you possibly can to this homeowner without putting the
Well,
city in jeopardy
And it's
of
not just
incurring
the
some
homeowner, but
liability.
it's for the benefit of the
Right.
community as a
Right.
whole.
Understood.
And for the other properties.
Right,
straight-
and then whatever the results of this further research are for this particular property, we could work with Chris to put together a resolution embodying that policy for future loans.
Are you okay with that?
I'm okay with that. Thank you.
Okay. All right, very good. All right, so we have some direction for staff? Okay. Is there anything else we need to do on this particular item?
No, I think we got everything, yeah.
So we'll do continuance, 2 weeks is okay? Okay. All right, let me get back to my agenda. Are there any future agenda items for the Hammett Housing Authority? Or is this enough for now? All right. With that, I will adjourn the Housing Authority meeting to the next Housing Authority meeting, which should occur after the next council meeting.